We spent our first few weeks talking about innovation with this in mind, that there will always be shifting priorities in education. But since COVID, there's been this increasingly important focus on how we can prepare students for life after high school, especially in Missouri. So, we're going to shift thinking about innovation to a very specific topic that's been popping up in Missouri schools. So, for these final 2 weeks, we're going to focus on how Missouri has been thinking differently about preparing students for their futures, and we're going to brainstorm some local ideas around this real world learning concept that fits into that vision. So I want to think about how our own portrait of a learner connects to this work, and then I want to begin by thinking about opportunities that already exist in our classroom. So, four things I want you to take away from this is I want you to get a little bit of a history on why Missouri has shifted into thinking about this as an innovation. I want you to understand where the state is at on some real world learning ideas, and then where some local things in the greater Kansas City have been shifting into this concept of market value assets, and then think about ideas within our own system that we can start brainstorming around innovation. So, why is Missouri investing in education in this way? So, most of Missouri's innovation happened because of pressure from business and industry, especially in the greater Kansas City area. Employers got really frustrated that as they were looking for new employees, they had to expand their search for high quality applicants outside of the state. They were annoyed because a ton of applicants were being added to the employee pool every May with graduation, but they felt like not a lot of them had the skills or dispositions that they needed to be successful in the career field. So, some state leaders heard this and recognized that the expectations for graduates have changed. So students still need strong academic knowledge, but these employers and colleges and communities that they were listening to consistently described additional competencies that they wanted to see. So recent studies, you can read on this, support it. They've scoured job postings and they've seen that almost every job posting is asking for two or more of these types of what we now call durable skills. So they used to be known as soft skills or competencies or 21st century skills, but most everybody's calling them durable skills nowadays. These are skills such as communication, collaboration, adaptability, problem solving, professionalism, initiative. The list goes on and on. So the question became, how do schools initially create opportunities for students to develop and demonstrate those competencies before they graduate? So everything we're going to explore today grew out of that question. Now, some districts began supporting this work by defining what success actually looks like. They came up with their own list. So many did this through creating a portrait of a graduate, or as we call it, portrait of a learner. So think of this as the destination. Before you start redesigning learning, you're going to have to agree on what kind of graduate we're trying to develop. So every district's portrait looks a little bit different, but they all identify these competencies that students should possess when they leave high school. So here's our example on the screen where it has these competencies that we want our students to graduate before they leave our school system. Then, once we know what kind of graduate we're trying to develop, the next question becomes, how do students actually build these competencies? So here in the greater Kansas City area, you see on the map, the Kauffman Foundation has been supporting this work with their real world learning initiative. So almost every school district on that map is now part of this idea to get students to collect meaningful experiences before they graduate and not after. So this idea of real world learning isn't another, curriculum or another class. It's been a different way of designing learning experiences. So students still complete rigorous academic work, but the difference is they are now applying those skills in what they're trying to do, authentic contexts that connect to life beyond school. So, real world learning creates opportunities for students to apply knowledge in authentic situations. Instead of trying to solve a problem for a teacher, students might solve a problem for a local business. Instead of writing only for a grade, they might be presented to a real audience. And instead of completing an isolated project, they might collaborate with professionals in the community. So the learning stays rigorous, but people becomes more meaningful because it has a real purpose. So Kauffman has supported this work locally, as you can see on the map. So real-world learning at the high school level focuses on getting students to graduate with what they call a market value asset. So market value assets are industry valued and recognized skills that help students with a seamless transition from school to the post-secondary world. So these are assets that showcase real-world problem solving, communication, collaboration, all of those things defined in our portraits of a graduate. And it does so with people beyond the school walls. So if the portrait is the destination and real world learning is the journey, then market value assets are the evidence. So rather than simply saying a student is prepared, market value assets, or MVAs, give graduates concrete experiences that they can talk about in interviews, in college applications, or future careers. So they're evidence that students have practiced the competencies that have been identified as important. Kauffman Foundation's work with real-world learning, their goal is to have 100% of students in the greater Kansas City area graduate with one of these by the year 2030. So I want to take a second and elaborate on this. And one of the resources I posted this week is actually a link to all of these defined as inside that innovation zone in the greater Kansas City area. So let's start with one of these. We're going to start with client connected projects, or CCPs. And each one of these market value assets have their own criteria. They're not meant to be watered down things that a student collect or just put on a transcript. They have to be this rigorous opportunity for students to authentically apply both academic and portrait skills. They need to be that way because that's the only place that they're meaningful. So this is not something that a student should just collect willy-nilly, but an experience that students go through so that they can practice and showcase those different skills that we want them to collect before leaving. A client-connected project is one where you take an outside community member and you bring them inside the school, and they bring with them a need or a problem that students have to try and solve. Now, in education, oftentimes we give students tasks that can be completed, right? You go through a checklist, you say, this is what I think I would do, and they turn it in and you move on to the next thing. Client-connected projects are also beyond that. They are that idea and actually executing that idea. So they're going to come up with a framework for a solution that a client has a problem for, and then they're going to provide all the details on how to execute that. So instead of being, a couple days or a couple weeks, this could be an entire semester where they have to communicate with clients and they have to provide a deliverable, and then they have to say what skills they used, communication, adaptability, and how they use them inside the design thinking process. So this concept of real world learning is all about getting the outside in and sometimes the inside, our students, out. There are some examples of this locally. Raypec is a neighbor that does something called a drive night. So they have client-connected projects with a lot of their community members and even some in-school clients. And all seniors who are taking the ELA 4 class go through that process, and they do a client-connected project. And they team up and they work in groups and they solve authentic problems that are meaningful to local community members. So it gets them engaged in the community, and through that, they have to practice all of those durable skills that Raypec wants them to graduate with. Real-world learning is one of the best environments for students to practice the competencies listed on Portrait of a Learners. They are just like academic standards, but our community chose them and we got to define them. So, look at communication. Students don't develop communication by just talking about communication. They develop communication by communicating with clients in this instance. They don't build adaptability by reading about adaptability. They build it when projects don't go according to plan and they have to adjust. These experiences give students authentic opportunities to practice the competencies we've said matter most. So let's look at an example. Imagine students working with a local business that needs help developing a social media campaign. Students have to meet with the client, they have to ask questions, they have to understand the audience, they have to develop ideas, they have to revise feedback and thinking based on feedback, and they have to present this final product to a professional. So notice the standards haven't disappeared. They're still writing, they're still researching, they're still communicating, but the difference is the work now matters in a way that sometimes doesn't in our traditional school setting. Another example of a market value asset is an entrepreneurial experience. These are students who are entrepreneurial minded that want to create a business opportunity for themselves. So this is finding a space inside our school system where they can develop a business that either provides a service or creates a product, and this is student led. So once again, in order for this to count, it has to be meaningful and it has to be something that takes a lot of time and feedback and allows students to practice those competencies. Another one is industry recognized credentials. These are things that you can become certified in that will be helpful when it comes to the job field. So if you look at that list of some common ones, a lot of these are currently gathered by our existing students through some of our partnership programs with Cass Career, Lead Center, Summit Tech. But these are things like OSHA 10 or EMT cert or Autodesk cert or Chromebook repair that students can leave high school with and immediately be more qualified than peers who do not have them in the career field. That list also for IRCs exists off of Dusty's website, so they have an extensive list. Some of these, according to our current educational system, we don't have enough time for inside our traditional school days. So that would be an area to explore that requires a little bit more flexible in thinking. Internships are another great market value asset. These are experiences where a student leaves our school building and they go somewhere. So this could feel like a flavor of work release, but they're trying to work inside a field that they want to have a future career ambition in, and they have to be evaluated by their career on those different durable skills that we find important. So there will be evaluated by their work boss with communication skills or any other skill that are on our portrait. This experience has to total 120 hours, and they'll also get feedback from an educator about how they're developing those competencies. And finally, this is the one that's probably most familiar with our normal school system, but this is college credit. There's a Core 42 list of college credit classes that work towards most degree programs. And in order for a student to collect a market value asset for college credit, they would need 9 or more hours of college credit. Now remember, we're talking about authentic experiences. This is one that is valuable, but the question is, are some of these more valuable than others if we want to truly innovate and have students experience school in a different way? So, Missouri is sometimes afraid of mandating these huge changes because they can be disruptive, especially without working out the pain points first. So the state recognized that schools can't really redesign learning alone, so they put through several other initiatives to try out this idea. So the first one I want to talk about is the Success Ready Student Network. That is a support system that helps districts learn from each other, and they have been working to determine what is the best way to work out what is really a competency-based learning idea into our existing school systems. So there are a lot of schools who work together, sharing resources and ideas to work through the details. We talked about with innovative ideas, sometimes those ideas don't fit our existing infrastructure, and that network of schools is put into place by the state to try and support those pain points. Trying new things also often disrupts the status quo. And in education, that could mean state testing. So Missouri also allowed some schools exploring real-world learning to fill out this innovation waiver to give them flexibility to try out new approaches with less risk. Businesses and community partnerships, are another initiative that the state's been working on, because they've always been this area of expansion to provide authentic audiences or clients or mentors for students. But our school system or professional system don't always line up exactly. And then a focus on career pathways. This hope is to help students connect these experiences to future opportunities. So these can sometimes feel like separate initiatives when you look at them, but they're actually all working together to help districts make this innovation of real world learning possible. However, this all has to go right if it wants to move out of a pilot and scale. So that's what I want to put your attention to today. You've been talking about innovation, you've been thinking about innovation. Now I want to give you a problem of innovation where people around us want this innovation to exist and to happen, but they need some brain power behind it. So it's your turn now. Innovation happens at different scales, right? Sometimes innovation is taking one lesson you've taught for years and giving students an authentic audience instead of having them, turn it in just to you. And sometimes it's inviting one community member into your class to provide feedback or as a guest speaker or as a subject matter expert. And those are meaningful innovations for real world learning. But other times we talked about innovation that is much larger. It might mean creating a new client-connected project. It might be launching a school-based enterprise, right? Some school-based business or connection. Or it might be redesigning an entire course around authentic learning experiences. Both of these matter, and they match up with the different types of innovation we talked about earlier. So as you think about your own roles or your own departments, I'd like for you to identify one idea in each category. What is one small improvement you could realistically make? And what is one larger opportunity you've always wished existed for students? So don't worry how you'll make it happen next. That'll be our last week's project. But I want you to think about something small and something big around this idea of real world learning. If you have any questions about the current state of affairs when it comes to real world learning in the state of Missouri, please ask, because I want to give you the details so when you brainstorm ideas, they're well within the confines of our current infrastructure.